you think vertical AI markets are too small, you're asking the wrong question. The real question isn't how big the software market looks today. It's how big of an opportunity for technology, services, even labor is for AI solutions in the future. The window on which markets can support venture scale outcomes has fundamentally changed, and the world hasn't caught up yet. Today's episode is all about that shift. Systems of record versus systems of action, why point solutions feel powerful and why most of them stall, and how AI is completely breaking the old rules of TAM, which is why today's guest is the perfect person to have this conversation with. Nate Baker is the founder and CEO of Qualia, a digital closing platform for the real estate, mortgage, and title industry. They serve over 500,000 professionals, and they sit at the center of one of the most complex, highly regulated workflows in the economy. Nate has built one of the defining systems of record in that space, turning coordination into chaos at massive scale. And along the way, Qualia has raised over $200 million from investors like Tiger Global, 8VC, and Menlo. But that's only half the story in today's show. Nate also runs and is a founder of Fractal, an accelerator that's helped build and shape more than 200 vertical software businesses. And in this conversation, Nate, Luke, and I go into all the uncomfortable questions. Is TAM too small, mostly a myth? Are systems of record still the moat in the vertical first world? And does domain expertise really matter anymore? If you're a founder, an operator, or an investor in vertical AI, this episode will change how you think about market size, moats, and where real value gets created. Let's get into it with Nate Baker. Nate, super excited to have you on today. I'm really excited to hear about the Qualia story, the Fractal story. You've been an inspiration in the vertical world, so thank you so much for taking the time. I know Luke and I are both jazzed.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be on.
Awesome. Well, with that, for the few listeners who maybe don't know your story, maybe just share a little bit of the background to kick us off.
Sure. So I started Qualia, which is software for title agents, about 11 years ago now. Hard to believe it's in like 2-3 weeks, 11 years. We sell software to the most important and underappreciated part of the real estate transaction, the title agent. And we're a core system of record. We've been building, and we're about 600 people now. We sell to a variety of different participants in the transaction, but all stemming from the title agent. And then also about 6 years ago, I started Fractal, which is a company that launches vertical SaaS companies. We've started 150 vertical SaaS companies at this point, and we're doing a bunch of new stuff in AI right now as well. But yeah, excited to talk with you. A lot of vertical SaaS topics to talk through.
No doubt. Well, I'd love to maybe kick it off with just a bit of a framing around the early days of Qualia. We chatted a bit before this about getting into the market size question, with kind of the tie-in of how AI is changing that. But I'd love to hear, how did you think about market size early on with Qualia? Did VCs see the same vision you did? Maybe paint that picture for us.
Yeah. So before starting Qualia, I worked at 8VC for 9 months. And so I was on the venture side and thinking about this. I remember we actually looked at Carta during that time period, which it must have been a seed or Series A. It was like very, very early. And I remember just the question that every fund at the time was thinking is like, cap table software, that sounds tiny. And I think really at that time, there was a real fear of going after these super niche verticals because the TAM expansion wasn't clear. And when we started, that was a real problem and something that we've heard in every single fundraising since then is, how big is this end market really? But I think what a lot of people don't appreciate about vertical markets is the ability to grow the end market is limited only by your creativity and ability to build value for your customer. And yeah, so it's been really interesting, but we've had to continuously, grow the end market and build more and more cool stuff. And the biggest opportunity that has ever happened in that category is everything going on with AI right now, which I'm sure we'll talk about a ton. But it's just this story of building a layer cake And that's the same with all the Fractal companies. That's the thesis we've gone after is there are so many of these end markets that people don't want to build something, scrapyard software. They're like, oh, that's too small of a market. But it turns out that if you are the core system of record, you can provide a ton more value to your customers with what is now a familiar playbook.
Makes total sense. I mean, as you think about, Qualia's kind of progress in building that layer cake, where did you think about where it made sense to start versus how did you think about what to expand into next?
So the calculus on this, I think, is changing a little bit with what you can build quickly now with I feel like some point solutions are maybe a little more compelling. But at the time when we started, our view was you just got to go do the work to be the core system of record. And it's going to take years and you're going to have to, deal with the deep regional complexity. And in our end market, there's just unbelievable complexity in the local, county, state setup. And every single state we'd go to, a customer would say, oh, you've not done anything in North Carolina before? North Carolina is the most complicated state in the country. And they were usually correct. There was something, and we had to kind of work through that. But yeah, I think going and being the core system of record has been the right strategy for most vertical market software. But I think one of the biggest open questions right now is if that's shifting.
Totally agree. I mean, Luke and I have, obviously that's a topic that comes up on this pod a ton. Yeah, it's hard to balance, right? Because you see some of these point solutions growing so quickly and it's hard to turn down, that growth. But I don't know, what does your gut tell you? I mean, is it case by case, or do you still think doing the hard work up front matters in the post LLM era?
I think that I'm much more interested right now in speed to market and getting to real revenue scale, particularly in an environment where durable competitive advantage is more of a question mark, especially as you're thinking like, okay, I'm going to build this ERP. It's going to take me 3 years to get to, $1 million ARR. If you're starting from scratch, that's a tough timeline given what's going on right now, where it's like, what's Gemini 4.5 going to be doing then? Like, I don't know, but it's probably going to be changing the game. And yeah, so I'm much more right now skewing towards speed to market.
So has your perspective shifted in the, like you guys said up front, we're going to do the work and be the system of record, and we're going to bite the bullet on the timeline and, and the pain that exists up front. Has that flipped? Like I heard you say like, yes, we got to be the core system of record, but I'm skewing more towards GTM. Like the other path is obviously the wedge path, right? Add secondary product offering and then ultimately become the system of record.
I think if you had enough foresight to be the system of record already, it's a very advantageous position from the perspective of being able to layer more and more of these products. And it turns out the primary constraint on being able to roll out LLMs across your business is actually, clean, structured workflows that are interpretable. And if you don't have that, that's where a lot of the point solutions fall down, is they really just can't get at that. And so that's going to be the core tension in all these markets over the next few years. But I interpreted the question to be more of like, if you're starting today, which do you go after? And to me, if you're starting today, you have to prioritize speed to revenue, and that means point solution because the underlying rate of change is so high. And so, yeah, it's a difficult question, but it's good. I think the competitive advantage of some of the legacy incumbents, like they're going to get commoditized in a lot of these different end categories anyway. And so if you're some point solution built on top that commoditizes the vet software platforms or whatever it is, that becomes a very compelling place to integrate backwards from.
Yeah. back real quick to the TAM question that Nick brought up, because I think it is important. I fundamentally don't believe in TAM sizing anymore at like pre-seed seed stage. Like I just don't actually think it makes sense. It's so much more about underwriting to like founder and maybe some like general market that you're going after. But we've just seen it. We've seen a couple of things happen. One is we've seen that vertical SaaS can monopolize. They can get to 50, 60, 70% market share, which everyone said, you remember Nick, when you were probably raising money in whatever, 2012, that would never happen. It was like, you should assume.
I think it's less about that. I think it's much more that the software actually can really materially help with the work being done. I think a lot of the old systems of record were more of like bean counting systems. Like they're just like helping you keep track of the work that was happening, but they didn't actually do the work. And I think what's happened is that these software platforms they're more interchangeable with the actual labor that is going
You're getting into
the
employee
end market.
spend versus like this blanket portal.
Yeah. And I think in a lot of these end markets, they're going to grow a lot. Like if you take legal end markets as an example, where there's 1,000 venture-backed companies and like different, like actually 1,000, I wouldn't be surprised if the businesses they're serving actually, even though they're automating a ton of their own labor, if they end up spending more on labor and they just provide way more legal services. Because, you're probably, and I know I could be consuming more legal services and advice, but if you can consume 50 times more legal services at the same end cost, like that's probably a win-win for everybody, including the business providing those services. So I think you're going to see that in a lot of these end markets as well.
I think you've got a lot of folks looking at a market size based on, hey, here's what's traditionally been spent on software, so here's a reasonable ACV, and then multiplying it by a reasonable number of customers. But that first piece is kind of where they fall off, because you're not factoring in the hard work this company, if successful, is going to do to find the next sort of work that it can do, or the next service it can replace, or headcount. And so we've had a bunch of examples on this show of folks who, people thought your ACVs were going to be capped at 5K. Well, it turns out like it's 10 times that at least. So I totally buy that. So Nate, you're in a pretty unique position that, you're launching a bunch of new companies, so deciding where to start, but you're also, I don't know if you would consider Qualia the legacy incumbent, but you're an incumbent in the sense that you have success already. As you think about AI point solutions that could disrupt Qualia, is that a concern, or do you feel like, hey, we have
That's a concern every day. I think every business that is not seriously reevaluating their product offerings right now is going to be done in 24 months. Like the ability to build new stuff is just profound right now. And, I'm waiting on some Claude Code stuff right now while we're on doing this, because there's going to be like, you can just make stuff now. It's pretty cool. And as someone who likes building stuff, like my main thing is like product and ideas about like, what can you go out and build? It's the most exciting time ever. So take a little bit of offense to your calling us a legacy incumbent. I'd say the legacy
not
incumbent,
an incumbent, not a legacy incumbent.
Yeah,
You'll become incumbent.
I would say the category of company I'm really excited about right now is actually like the Tiger portfolio companies that took like a tremendous amount of heat in 21, 22, who've been, all in the gym getting a distribution for 5 years, and who were at some scale, found discipline, and actually are creative in product and have good engineering teams if they've been able to keep grinding and growing really well, where there's actually distribution as well as the ability to go launch all this new stuff. And what we're seeing is that customers in our end market, they know AI is important. Like they, in their day-to-day, use ChatGPT, and they're like, wow, Like this is ridiculous. Like, why can't I get this in my business? And the level of demand is so high that I think we're seeing huge acceleration across all of our products because we are the player in the market that can provide that. And the actual legacy incumbents, which in our case, the biggest one's called SoftPro, they just can't keep up because they're like a super actual legacy on-premise type of situation. And so it's going to be really interesting how that changes a lot of these markets. But in the same way, if we didn't do that, if we weren't really on offense trying to build incredible new software, I don't think we'd have any customers in 24 months because, I think it's that profound of a change.
Title is such a good area too for AI. I feel like it's a beautiful use case, but if you miss the on-prem to cloud wave, like you are so screwed right now in this era. Like if you're still doing, like I remember we used to compete against a company that was like in the middle of that around the ChatGPT launch. Like that is a very dangerous place to be today.
Yeah, I think there's still, Amazon always publishes this stat, the AWS, in their quarterly reports on like the percentage of IT spend, which is in the cloud. And I can't remember the most recent number, but I remember putting a pitch deck together for Fractal at some point, and it was like 11% or something. It was like something like ridiculous. And so the interesting thing is we're still in the very early innings of cloud, like in a lot of these end markets, which is crazy. Like that makes no sense. And so I agree with what you're saying, which is that that transition, one thing I'm thinking about is I really view this as like a pretty near term, we're going to be able to deliver huge amount of automation, like game changing amount of automation. And for companies that aren't making the jump to the web-based, AI native platform that can do this sort of thing, I just don't know it'll be interesting to see like the market dynamics that play out in all these end markets, like just auto dealers that have these, there's so many great, AI calling services for auto dealers now. Like if you're not doing that, I wonder, you probably just lose a lot of share.
I think so. I mean, if you're an incumbent and you don't have an answer towards it, but I want to dig into that exact point because I feel like this is something we've probably all seen of like, look, fielding calls or handling outbound calls or even scribing, right? These voice use cases that are so easy to adopt, they're transformational, they're magical, they're like, oh, wow, it's so great, right? But, it's like underlying infrastructure is more or less commoditized and you're not a system of record. And so like whether you're that, dealership DMS or, you're that, vets, PMS, like you own the data and you'll just go pick one to partner with and then have parity. I mean, I'm kind of steel manning the argument, but in a world where there are 30 of those that are credible with good teams that, went up to a couple million ARR overnight, how does that play out?
Incumbents have the advantage. There's no doubt about it. The challenge though is if you take a step out of like our Silicon Valley bubble, right? And back to Nate's point, and I'm seeing this at like, a lot of these like PE backed companies that I've, been talking to and spending time with is like their AI is like a search engine replacement. Like that's like, they don't even understand what it can do yet. That's the vast majority of the market. And so people who aren't like listening to this podcast or like in the thick of this wave, like they haven't even seen an AI generated PowerPoint yet. They don't even know that it can replace PowerPoint. But the incumbents actually show them and get their act together and have that like product lens. Like I'm with Nate. I think they should win. They're positioned to win, but I think a lot of them aren't going to get their act together.
Totally. I think the incumbents have a 12-month advantage. And to your point, if they can figure out how to partner, if they can figure out how to do stuff and there's compelling enough offerings, But that's for the incumbents that are positioned to actually do this. Like a lot of the, the vet providers or all the ones that you mentioned, their underlying systems are so antiquated that it's actually hard to deploy them and update it and get access to get the LLM understanding of what's going on in the right way and get it integrated into the customer's workflow in the right way. And so I think there's just a lot more barriers to actually achieving that. And if you actually think the rate of change is quite high in the underlying technology, I think that some of the weaker incumbents from a technology perspective are going to have a very hard time keeping up. But that's the central question as you're thinking about the competitive dynamics. But I'll give you a specific example. I was talking to a top vertical software company, legacy, more of legacy. They probably call themselves legacy. Huge business, incredible business. And they're talking about rolling out something. I was showing them our Qualia Clear product, talking to them about that. And they said, oh yeah, we're building this. We'll have something similar out in like 18 months, maybe 12 months. And I think that is the mindset that a lot of these businesses are operating in. And that's just not going to be sufficient, because in 6 months, what is currently in the market is going to be legacy, and you're going to have to be pushing so hard. And I think that's the fun right now. But that's also what I think the software vendors just aren't getting through in most cases.
We wanted to take 10 seconds to call out our partner and supporter on Verticals, Paraffin. You already know why embedded finance is important. You want to power all the ways your customers make money and grow their business. But you don't want to be a bank, you don't want to be a credit card company, you don't want to be a lender. Paraffin can help you with that. They help portfolio companies of ours, friends of ours, hundreds of other vertical founders increase retention, increase revenue, grow their TAM. So if you don't know Paraffin, please take a second to check them out. You can go to paraffin.com, that's one F, or the link is below this video. Thanks for listening, and back to the show. I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, if legacy incumbents could move quickly, probably none of us would be doing the same job. But the thing my head keeps coming back to is, Nate, to your point, if just the fundamental pace of software development and the ability of like what you can take on as a early stage venture backed team has fundamentally changed. If there is an inevitable switching cycle off of these legacy incumbents, whether or not it takes 1 or 5 or 8 years, then on one hand, I totally see, hey, just like move quickly, get distribution, offer the flashy product, even if it's not defensible. On the other hand, I wonder, well, someone's going to rebuild a system of record or system of action or whatever you call the next gen. How long do you avoid that? Or do you just bite the bullet?
I think it's kind of a rate of growth question more than anything. Like, to me, when to do the adjacency is more of a question of like your current sales efficiency and rate of growth. So like, if you're growing over 100% a year, or maybe, if you're at some scale, let's say like north of 5 million revenue, if you're growing at over 100% a year and you have compelling reason to believe that's going to continue to compound, or that you could even accelerate that a little bit, and your sales efficiency looks good, like you LTV to CAC at 3 or something, like gross margin adjusted, to me, you should not be getting into the adjacency. So, unless you like really need that ACV expansion to justify what you're trying to do on the sales side. That's not to say that
don't expand if you have good metrics, don't expand.
I guess if there's a tension there, because I think I strongly believe you should be always looking for the ACV expansion and like continue to build a layer cake. But I think you can overdo it and kind of distract the R&D team and distract from your ability to continue onboarding all these customers. And if your sales efficiency is a reflection of your product market fit. And so if your sales efficiency is not good, there's something you need to be doing on your core product before it's really like a question of expansion. And so to me, the core product should be flying off the shelf with good sales efficiency. And then you should be like absolutely hitting the gas on the go-to-market side before you're like too nervous about, okay, how am I going to add that incremental 10K ACV?
I do think we've over-rotated on multi-product. I mean, you guys remember this. Like 10 years ago, it used to be just do one thing and do it exceptionally well. And then in the last 5 years, it's been like multi-product, multi-product, multi-product. It's the only way to like build a big business in one industry. And so you just see, and then embedded solution explosion, right? Like 80% of them founded after 2018 or something, I read recently. So we have seen that. And like, I don't think I'm with Nate on like specific, like strong performance. I think it's actually more of an art than science. Push back if you disagree, but like you got to build secondary and tertiary products, but you can't just go and build 30, embedded solutions and think you're going to be successful.
In a lot of ways, it's a semantic, it's like a categorization question of like, what is this product, versus is it one big thing? And so my point is not like stop building major features. It's probably one product at one price point until you have good ACVs, or like until you have a good sales efficiency.
I think the landscape also really does matter. Like if you happen to have a market where there's like high fragmentation amongst whatever that system of record is, it might not really matter. If you have a market where, let's say we use the example of, like Epic and Cerner and EHRs, where like the power is tremendous, right? And so in that circumstance, you really got to think about it. Maybe in the circumstance where you have more leverage, you could build it earlier. Like, because I think the honest truth is, I'm all for growth and distribution, but those examples of vertical AI companies that are high initial flyers and then get turned off by a legacy system of record because they're concerned, those stories are happening too.
I don't know that many of those, to be honest. I think that just from what the best way to think about it is, what are the prices that people are paying in the market in those two scenarios? And I have a lot of data points on both of them, and they're very clearly paying for growth. And so I think that from that perspective, it's like
the underlying businesses are, you're saying?
I'm saying like VCs, or like the capital source for these businesses have a strong preference towards growth over you build a system of record, like great. Yeah. And so I think they care tremendously about, have you actually gone out and build this thing that is able to give proof that it works in the market, and like people are speaking up. And so just from that perspective, and given that the big open question for me is like, it might just be quite a bit easier to build the 20% of the system of record from the fact that you have the point solution and starting to work back, given what's happening with LLM. So like maybe that ends up being more possible. And the constraint is, do you have the industry context? Can you talk to the right people? Do you have customer that's actually using the workflow that you can incrementally build off of? So that's where I'm less keen on kind of the strategy of, build this castle of like all of the ERP type stuff before you're actually like engaging with, driving revenue.
Yeah, no, it's fair. Plus, like, always easier to sell new stuff into existing customers than the other way around, right? So like, you get some distribution, now you have people you could sell that new ERP to. But I guess to put a point on the question, like, will there be point solutions that get great initial distribution but turn around at a certain point and are kind of stuck because they either are not at the right point in the workflow, like you said, Nate, or they just haven't thought about ERP like strategy enough?
100%. I mean, you're absolutely going to see, and there are probably a lot of them out there already, company that went from 0 to 10 of ARR like immediately, and then they stopped pushing, and then you can just ask ChatGPT to do that thing, and 6 months later, and it does it. And I think you're going to see a lot of stuff like that. But I guess part of my feeling is that the companies that are able to do that are the ones that are going to continue being able to do that, and the teams that are going to execute well against new LLM capability, and that, which I think is the whole question, because you're kind of demonstrating you're going to be able to do that. You're getting an installed base of customers who want that type of thing, and you're going to be able to keep pushing the envelope. But yeah, I expect that we'll see a tremendous amount of that over the next few years here.
I'd love to pivot us into Fractal for a moment here. I think, I think most people have heard about Fractal, in at least in the vertical world. And I'd love to hear like the founding story of Fractal, because I feel like that's not as well known. And then any like insight into the machine of how you guys did so many companies so quickly, and then, where it is today, where it's going. I think it's just interesting.
Yeah. So the starting point of Fractal was really that Mike Furlong, my co-founder, and I, he started a company called Indio. Indio is also an insurance workflow software. He took a point solution on top of a system of record strategy. And we ended up having the same Series A investor, the same two people on our board, basically. And we became friends talking about the fact that everything we were doing was identical. It was basically like the exact same questions. His business started 2 years later, and so he had like the literal exact same experiences. And we just said, look, these are fundamentally business models that I feel like are more like building a commercial building, or they're more like construction than they are like R&D in the traditional sense of like science and like coming up with like a new invention. And our philosophy was that people hadn't yet understood this in the capital markets, and also in the entrepreneurs that wanted to go build stuff but didn't have an idea, weren't looking at these types of ideas, like the really niche stuff. And so what we did is the first company we were trying to start was a funeral home software. And the first CEO we were trying to hire, Omri, actually became CEO of Fractal and helped start the business with us. And so what Fractal really solved for was, when you're starting a business, there's basically three problems. There's what are we going to do? There is like, where's the money going to come from? And then there's, who's my partner? And so our idea was basically that if you created more liquidity in each of these buckets, you helped solve the matching problem of finding an idea you want and finding a partner you want to work with. And if we solved the capital problem, it kind of helped to bring all of these together. And so we worked with the third-party fund called Bienville Capital, where I had worked in college, and who's one of the biggest Qualia investors. And we basically put together this structure that allowed for, we had a massive research team, a big recruiting team, and then portfolio operations to actually help companies, best practices in sales, best practices in product. And what we saw was we're able to compress the time from you going, I want to start a company, to qualified person actually being in seat with an MVP, like a product that actually works, by about a year. And so the big value add that we created was huge acceleration in getting to the point where there's actually a product, where you have actual customers and things are moving with an idea that's really well vetted. So the first iteration of Fractal was purely vertical SaaS, and almost all of them were systems of record, like complete ERP systems of record. I gave the example of Scrapyard software. That was one of our first companies, but addiction treatment, things like that, like complicated, important, underappreciated workflows. I always say like a sneaky big opportunity, where something that seems small, but it's actually like one of the most important, American enterprises that people just don't think about. And then we've basically started to do a lot more AI businesses now, and are taking more of a point solution type of approach, although there will be plenty of systems of record as well. There's, I think, a little bit of a different, I mean, like we've been talking about, the world is completely different than it was 5 years ago when we started.
It's super fascinating. Is there anything into like industry selection, or, you know, when you were thinking about ERP and now point solution, like, is there any kind of framing that you're willing to go a little bit deeper on like how you guys find an industry, how you think about selection, like characteristics that it may need to exhibit? Like, I'd love to understand the research angle of it.
Yeah. I mean, the research is the thing that I personally enjoy the most. And also just building out a team of experts of like, that can really evaluate these ideas was, you know, is basically like it's challenging, very interesting. It's interesting work because you get to like look across a very broad range of different ideas and kind of say like, oh, this is interesting. And we can have a dialogue about, you know, what ends up being a good end market. There's a lot of things we look for. We're looking for systems of record, you know, incumbents that are not doing all the stuff I just said you should be doing. And so if you think about the last 15 years of enterprise software, a lot of what people have been talking about is, oh, you know, it would be great. I'm going to build a Constellation or a Roper or like a Vista, where the strategy is buy something, take out a ton of R&D, cash flow the machine. That's what a lot of these companies have been doing. And so the R&D has to come from elsewhere. I kind of think of it in some ways like what happened in pharma. If you look at pharma, like all the actual drug discovery happens not at the big pharma companies. They're like buying and then they're the distribution. I kind of think of something similar as happening right now, where you have all these like big PE owned companies that have stripped out all the R&D and are more like cash flow oriented. And then you have all of these upstarts that are building cool new stuff. And so we basically look for like, where is there opportunity from all of these companies who aren't building features that, you know, their customers want.
And can you talk about at all like what, you know, what your first couple years of data has looked like, you know, and maybe any examples of like really interesting companies that have come out of the group?
Yeah, I mean, it's been incredibly successful. Like with the businesses are doing very well, beating like a ton of benchmarks. The interesting thing is it's early stage. Like we're first check in, so you do have some amount of failure, but overall businesses are great. I think Written's one of my personal favorites, which is the addiction treatment rehab clinic software. About 20% of our companies are in some sort of medical related category. And that's just such a good end market for vertical SaaS. A lot of what we've done is very oriented around independent clinics or, you know, some place that has independent operations. You know, if you're part of a hospital system, it's a lot harder to make a sale. But these businesses all need their own dedicated software. And a lot of them have this same sort of expansion story where, you know, maybe you start with EHR, you like the core system, but you need some note taking, you need revenue cycle management, you need some sort of client portal, you need, and it keeps compounding and growing. And so, yeah, they've been doing really well there, but we have businesses in a ton of like obscure niches, and yeah, the thing is, like all these markets, they seem really niche, but then you like get into it and it's actually like they're not. So I don't have a good answer for you on that, because so many of them, like they start small, like, you know, airplane parts or like airplane part distributor, like this sort of stuff, you or aircraft maintenance, like you think that is a small market, but that's a huge market. And basically all of them end up being that way, where there's just a lot of expansion from getting into the distributor stuff or getting into some sort of marketplace or payments workflows. Yeah.
I just saw one that was horse show managed
Dude,
stuff.
I was just gonna say this. I was like, what weird niche should I talk about? And that I've seen two in my career. I've seen two equestrian focused vertical SaaS companies. That's probably not even the smallest, to be honest. And even that one, I was like shocked at how big the market actually is.
Yeah. People like their horses. They spend some dough.
Yeah, man. Once you get that commerce baked in.
I think the like I would never do something like that, because the thing that we're trying to do is say these are markets that sound small, but actually they're like a pillar cornerstone of the economy. We're not trying to like get into these super niches. So it's something like, and you need a continuous ACV expansion, even when you've won, even when you're at a huge scale. Like there needs to be the next thing to do, because otherwise you kind of just hit the end of the road and the opportunity goes away, and capital markets do not like that. And you're just never going to be able to sell the business or do the next step, because you've got to sell it to someone who thinks you can grow it for durably for a long time.
I guess just reflecting overall on learnings from Fractal so far, any like, whether it's company building or how to approach a vertical, any like learnings, do's or don'ts stand out?
Yeah, a couple things. So we've done a lot of like the analysis on, given 150 companies, and a lot of them have aged at least 3 years at this point, and we can see future marks, like what correlates. Number one, if the founders are in the same city and do not work together 5 days a week in the office, that is very bad. If they are remote, it actually doesn't matter that much versus what I personally would have expected. The biggest signal is if they're in the same office, if they're in the same city and they could be working together, but they're not, which was super interesting.
Is that an indicator of like performance or product speed, or just like founder breakups?
It's an indicator of performance. Yeah, it's like from like a value generation, enterprise value generation perspective. I basically have my list of like who I think is going to do the best. That has not correlated with who's done the best. It's been super interesting. Like even at multiple points, I've gone, okay, these are the 10 companies that are going to do really well. One of our best companies right now, like it felt to me like they were going to go out of business like 12 months ago, and now they're crushing it and growing really, really fast. And yeah, some of the one thing also that's really made a huge difference is founders who can sell, who are like very oriented around the commercial value of their product. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're like salespeople, which I think are, we're not trying, but like more finance oriented CEO profile who can sell but also who like cares about technology and like the craft of engineering. Because at the end of the day, these are engineering companies. And so, yeah, I would say those are kind of some of the key persona like takeaways. And then speed to execution against like time to MVP and time to first revenue, which we track for everybody, is a huge indicator. And like we can tell, like now given the distribution that we've seen, like 8 weeks after you've started, if you're like really lagging, like not good. And so it's interesting. It's there's just a lot of things like that are relatively higher signal than I would have expected, but still it's hard to know the outliers. And for that reason, like I think our job is different than being a VC. Like the VCs have to pick the outlier. I still don't know how they do that. That seems kind of difficult, but our approach is very much more like focused on the company formation and just like going after as many of good ideas as you can.
Yep. Awesome. Well, Nate, we're about at time, but I wanted to run maybe through just like 2 or 3 rapid fire questions. I have a few. Luke, maybe if you want to think up one, and you You can just agree or disagree or expound on it if you want. So first one, and these are not necessarily my views. They're just, designed to be thought experiments here. Number one, 90% of the TAM is too small concerns in the era of vertical AI are fake. It's just VCs trying to control things they can't. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that it's asking the wrong question.
Totally.
It's like, can you durably keep expanding the TAM? That's the only question. And of course you're going to be able to, because the LM capability is going up. And then it's like, are you actually going to beat that other team that's next to you doing the exact same thing?
Love it. Okay. 2, and then Luke, I'll let you close out. Domain expertise is underrated in vertical software and vertical AI. A sharp 20-year-old engineer like Matters is helpful, but is not going to be outperformed by a domain expert with similar capabilities.
I would say 8 years ago, it was overrated. I think people have generally come to the conclusion that it doesn't matter at all, which I feel like is the consensus view right now. And I think also like we did this as well. Like we were not particularly interested in domain expertise as we're building things out. But I think it's probably underrated at this point, because particularly as you're going into medical or like more complicated billing type industries where who's paying is a little bit more confusing, where there's a lot of incentive issues, I think it's underrated.
All right.
Awesome.
I'll close this out. Favorite wedge product in the AI era?
Oof. I mean, Claude Code, I feel like it's a wedge product of the highest order, because they're a tool that's sort of helping you out, but we'll see where it goes. Like it feels like it's the model that everyone should be pursuing. And yeah, it's going to be crazy what they're able to do over there in the next 6 months.
300 billion valuation, right?
That's what I heard. Yeah.
350.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And we'll stop there, I'm guessing. Cool. Well, I know we'll give your last 5 minutes back, but yeah, man, this is a lot of fun. Really appreciate it. I think it's gonna be a good one. We'll follow up with some info, but we'll let you go, man.
All right. What a killer episode. He is the mad scientist of vertical SaaS. Indeed. We got theoretical, but we also got a little tactical. So anyways, thanks for being here, everybody. We will see you next week with another episode from Verticals.
See you then.